As we emerge from COVID-19, we are even more cognizant of the values imbibed in craft practice and the very visible role it plays in cultures across South Asia. Besides, of course, its contribution to the country's GDP and indeed its direct impact on more than 8 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030, to which all the countries of South Asia are signatory to. As a member of the Asia Society's Advisory Council for Arts and Culture, it is wonderful to be part of this inaugural panel for their series that is focused on new vocabularies for crafts. And we are so fortunate in having such remarkable doers, practitioners, and thinkers on this panel. So as we embark on this series, in an attempt to grapple with these issues, which is a hard task indeed, I welcome you all. And I'm delighted to moderate this panel with Noorjehan, Kalam, and Annapurna. As Inakshi has briefly already introduced the panel, I will refrain from reading out their long and illustrious bios. However, if you wish to know more about them, just check in the chat box, and you find links where you can connect and read far more about them. However, without taking up any more time, let me dive right in and start the discussion. So, my first question is, what is craft? Yes, I know there are a multitude of definitions, but given your perspectives and years of experience, in its essence, what does the word craft mean to you? And I ask this question equally of all the panelists. So it'll be great if each speaker would respond in not more than a minute or two, as we have time to expand on each point over the course of this discussion. So may I start with you, Noorjehan? So over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I really am honored. I'm just going to start by saying that I would like to use an Urdu word, which is actually borrowed from Persian. It's a Persian word in part of Urdu and Hindi. That craft actually is called dastkari, dast being the hand and kari being work. And the minute you put dastkari instead of craft, which also has a slight, to me, negative connotations when you're cunning, crafty, it can be moved into other things. Dastkari removes and dissolves, deletes all the boundaries. So any work that is done by hand is done by using your eye, your mind, your head, and more so by your heart. Dastkari and dastkar are the craftspersons. I think simplifies it very much so. I know we've got short time, but I think I'll just read out one tiny quotation by British ceramist Bernard Leach. He writes that, sadly, his definition is good work proceeding from the whole man, heart, head, and hand in proper balance is what craft is.
Thank you, Noorjehan. Kalam, now the question is posed to you.
Good evening, everybody. So I am also a remote village people, and I have seen some people make the baskets with bamboos, and maybe variation hundreds like this. The generation after generation, they are making the same things. And sari also. So this may be crafts. Porchitra may be also crafts and add both. So sometimes Porchitra makes the same thing, Manusha Mangal, Ramayana, and they make the story, they sing the song. Sometimes they make different things. So it both is crafts and art, as per my point of views.
Thank you, Kalam. Annapurna, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me on this panel and craft. So I have been observing for a long time that in the teaching of art and the study of art history and the evaluation of various kinds of acts of making and thinking, there's this division between practice and theory, which I think really creates lots of conceptual problems, economic problems, and problems of authorship. So craft often, the idea of craft loses out when we divide practice from theory. So what I'd like to suggest, and these are not my words, these are the words of Glenn Adamson, who is such a wonderful thinker about craft, that craft is a kind of material intelligence. So those of us who grew up in a generation, I was born in 1966, we were taught how to stitch balls and make samosas. And you understood certain things through your fingers, which were not about words, but they were about a certain sort of perceptual and intelligence about how you did things and how that material worked in your hand. So this could then be abstracted to many other things. For example, even coding. You could be a very good craftsperson when you're coding on the computer. So I'd like to begin there and say I see it as a form of material intelligence.
Thank you. So my next question. While categorizations help define this complex world, they have created boundaries between the craftsperson and the designer, between the folk, tribal, vernacular artist and the fine artist. Again, this question is addressed to all the panelists. So in the kernel, what do these terms mean to you? What is the difference between them? And while I know it is an expansion of the definition, it allows us to just get a little bit deeper into it. So I start again with Noorjehan. So it's over to you.
I think if we try and if you're putting the folk, tribal, vernacular artists as one group versus the fine artists, there's so many, it's first of all, just really is uncomfortable to put them in different categories. But yes, there is this freedom of expression and there is that liberation that they have, which is not closed or confined by theories or by the knowledge that the fine artist has been put under. So I think it's a very liberated expression that they come out in any of their materials, whether it's textile or carving on stone or you're painting on, like Kalam and so many other craftsmen are doing. How are you going to define it? It's also like, it's the same thing about the individual versus the community. When you look into the fine artist, whether you're doing outside or you're working with a group, but the ideas are being generated all in your studio. It's by yourself. It's the I importance and the individual. All our craft activity is communal. It's working with the team and it happens at different level and the whole community works together. So I feel those are also it also falls sadly that the fine artists become the elitists. It's they, them, I, all that different stages start coming into it. So I think it's about time that, as I mentioned earlier, that these categories have to be removed. And for any creative work to happen together, it's a time where the designers or the fine artist as such work in unity with folk, tribal, vernacular. Also, I think, just adding one more would be that all our craft really began as functional. There was a very important aspect that if you're creating a textile, it was for a certain purpose. whether it was a sari or a shawl or a dress, or you are carving something, you're making a clay pot, everything was functional. Whereas we have the fine artist as such, the individual has the freedom by giving the statement and justifying whatever they've done, you get away with it. So they are completely bound by these canons, is what I feel.
Thank you, Noorjehan. Kalam, question now is to you.
Noorjehan clear much in this connection. So craftsperson is a creative person. So I think there should not be a boundaries. I am also creating something. I am from village people, and my vernacular language, I don't know better English. And so many crafts people, tribal people, they speak their vernacular language. So there should not be a difference. We should have to dialogue with them. We have to respect these people and listen to them. We have to listen their problem also. So all are creative. They are not copying the crafts learned from their father and grandfathers. So they have creativity, and the modern painter of any branches or sculpture, they are also doing something new. The craftspersons are also doing something new, some innovative works. So I think there is should not be boundaries. So-called people make some walls like this one folk, this one tribal, this is traditional. I face so many problems in this connection. So when I start my work, something new, I asked Dr. Jyotindra Jain that, sir, I want to make exhibition with this Kalighat paintings. Is it possible for me? Because I'm a traditional folk painter. And I saw my works with him. And he was very happy to see my new work. And he assured me it's maybe possible. So this is the fact, actually. So we have to respect the craftsperson as an artist.
Thank you, Kalam. You're so right. Annapurna?
I'll speak about it more from the policy perspective because I think that part might also play a role. The fact is that educational institutions in India that teach art history and art do not have programs for anything that's not Anglophone. So that comes from a tradition of modernist art education. So when textile art or Kalighat painting or Pat painting or any of these things are included, there's a kind of attitude that these are our tradition and we can borrow from them, but they are not worthy of serious art histories, nor are they worthy of serious critical engagement. So in practice, of course, it's exactly what Noorjehan ji has said and what Kalam has said, is that everybody's engaging with their creative potential and their ideas, and they manifest differently in different visual languages and visual histories. But if we look at the way government policies have divided, it's very important to understand that we may not like words like tribal and adivasi, but government funding comes through these channels. Resources, institutional support, markets, through these categories. So they're not something we can wish away. We actually have to, I feel very strongly, acknowledge them and understand that they're very limiting. So then work with them to constantly push against them. So Adivasi artist might introduce himself as Adivasi at a museum, as a Gond at another, as a Pradhan at another moment. At a time, that same Pradhan will introduce themselves as Gond and sometimes as tribal. And somebody like me might argue that this is contemporary art. So we have to be able to handle this. That's the job of people who want to talk and work in this field.
And I think that that is what makes it all, that we are positioned at such a remarkable time, that we are having these discussions, we are pushing back. And I also feel that it's a good period for making and bringing out change, because we are not only dependent any longer on government funding. We have CSR funding, we have many thinkers, we have new institutions, we have civil society, and there is a pushback. I see it so clearly from what Kalam is saying. No, you are wrong. I am a creative artist. And as these voices rise and we speak for each other and with each other based on our own practice, our own context, I see the change coming in. It has taken us 75 years to build our confidence, to step out into the light. And it will take us a longer time. But the very fact that these forums are bringing this to the fore, I think is the beginning of change. So now I come to my next question, which again is addressed to all of you again, because on this panel, we are so fortunate to have people who have already broken this glass ceiling. You all have worked towards entering institutions like museums and art galleries with these so-called traditional arts. Kalam has been in the Victoria and Albert Museum, National Gallery of Modern Art, and other places. You, Annapurna, have done remarkable work in this area, as has Noorjehan. So my question now is that what can we do? What more can we do to break this glass ceiling? Because it still continues to be rare. What can we do about it? How do we open this out further? So Annapurna, this time I start with you. So,
thank you. Okay, so I have a minute, so I'll say something.
You have longer. Take your time.
Okay.
The minutes are over.
Okay, so I really feel very strongly that we have three institutions. Let's really look at it like Faculty of Fine Arts Baroda, Shantiniketan, and maybe JNU, School of Arts and Aesthetics. And then we have NIFT, we have National Institute of Design, and we have CEPT. So the Council of Architecture recently has mandated the study of architectural history. NIFT has recently introduced a special category of student who are children, either hereditary artists or children of hereditary artisans. That's the word, not artists, hereditary artisans. So when we are beginning to think institutionally of incorporating things which were not there, let's say 75 years ago, let's do things differently. So for example, the category of vernacular architecture, which is very widely used across the world to talk about a certain kind of architecture, a certain kind of materiality, a certain kind of community language, a certain orientation to the environment. It's not some sort of timeless, ahistorical, authorless species. It's full of creativity, its own complex engagements with economics, the availability of resources. So I really feel very strongly that at this moment, educational institutions have to take on the labor of crafting curricula that allows the range of makers and communities of makers who want to think about things like craft. What does it mean to call something vernacular? I used this word once, and it's interesting to see the life that it has taken on in the field of the visual arts. I'm sort of an observer as much, I use the word less now, but I observe it. So I'm really interested in seeing educational institutions begin to create very strong critical thinking and making models that engage with questions of history, market, economics, intellectual property, Intellectual property is not the linear model that copyright versus copyleft. Craftspeople have much more complex ideas. People who come from hereditary crafts families have much more complex ideas about intellectual property. So all these things need to be held by our institutions and debated and taught and discussed and probed. So this is what I think.
Thank you, Annapurna. I would also like to add that there is a movement at the grassroots, the Mithila Art Institute and others, small voices, but they have a reverberating impact. But coming down to Kalam, sorry.
I just want to say one thing. Actually, the amazing thing is that it's these institutes like Mithila Art Institute, Somaya Kala Vidya, and other schools, which are actually poking at these much larger institutions. Almost Mithila artists, there's at least 3 generations of modern Mithila art practitioners.
And I would actually add one institution, which is the Indian Institute of Craft and Design. They have, being a single institution, they have been pushing more buttons than others. But now I come to Kalam. Kalam, हमने इतनी बातें की हैं और आपने मुझे इतनी कहानियां सुनाई हैं कि ये कैसे तोड़ सकते हैं हम? अब आप बताइए, आपके ख्याल में क्या है ये जो बाइनरी है कि ये ऐसे है और ये ऐसे है, कैसे तोड़ें?
So we have to think to develop the craft sector. Investment is very essential for development of crafts sector, for development of the crafts people also. So there is a responsibility of government, NGOs, and others institution, and they give the opportunity to the crafts persons or craft artists to with the workshop, with the students, school, college, everywhere, and this would also ask or invite to the Development Institute to speak their problems, like this, and nowadays it has changed gradually. So when I started, it was very difficult to display my paintings in art gallery or workshop in the art institution. Only it was limited in a crafts museum in Delhi and like this. So this has been changing gradually. So this is the responsibility of all sides. I think so.
Thank you. Noorjehan, over to you.
I'll just use an example of something that I recently did, and I feel that a lot of that can be done, is to work closely with the master crafts people so that something can be seen and felt, and that itself, I know that we had started Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. One of the main aims was to inject in the student body a total understanding of what your cultural heritage is. But it's been now 30 years, very little has happened. So I just feel time is running out and we're losing on some very precious master craftsmen. So I just want to quickly explain that in the Pakistan pavilion that I designed for Dubai Expo 2021, the country, there were 192 countries participating, and the main thrust by our government was to project Pakistan as a progressive, contemporary, cutting-edge technologies. And I was trying to explain there is no cutting-edge technology. What we are really proud of and what we have, better than almost all of them, and I'm not including India, as like India, Pakistan being one, I'm talking about the other countries, is indigenous technologies. And so I worked with the master craftsmen in trying to push their boundaries. So the scale became different. And I know a lot of people who've done it. Ritu Sethi, you've got giants sitting there who has worked with master craftsmen, and Martin Singh and Lala Tayyabji in Hadaskar. But this just helped. I think they first said, no, it cannot be done. But just pushing them and making them work and not coming up with anything from outside, but pulling out from their own repertoire, which has been handed down over generations. It's just so contemporary. It's just unbelievable. Whatever we call contemporary is all there. It's not teaching to bring it out. I was learning as I was looking at that. So I think there has to be more projects, and perhaps it should be done at a national, international level, or at least these regions, if you're looking at policy change, that a lot of the traditional crafts have not to be put away on shelves, but looked as part of our daily lives and bring it into. Morocco has done it, Tunisia has done it. We do have examples of countries where, and how Japan has made national treasures. Their artisans and master crafts people are national treasures, and they're given a lot of respect. That has to come in. We have to acknowledge their level, the status, and it has to become part of the mainstream. There's this whole mainstream in which that sector of craft is absent.
Thank you for bringing up this point, Noorjehan, because we have so many shared traditions, many traditions that are rooted in the same soil. So do you think these practices have drifted apart? Do they provide some common ground for cross-border unity in this fraught time? What do you think we should be doing?
I wish the politics would move out and we are able to, work together. Again, I'm sorry, I'm just repeating my own work, but I think that's the best way of explaining something. I was researching on Ajrak, and when I came up to the edge, the boundary, a line was drawn, and I know that Ajrak is continuing on the other side. My research stopped there and then. And similarly, at that time, things were more open. I had met all the master craftsmen, Ismail Bhai, many, many times across in India, and his whole family. So for me, going to Ajrakpur as such and Bhuj was something like visiting a holy land. And then I realized that, by that time, after this disconnect, Ajrak has moved in a different direction across the border. Ajrak is in a different way. There were designers that were there in India's policy. A lot of designers came and did brilliant things with Ajrak. But on the other hand, what happened here, there were no designers, but it was very much part and parcel of the community and communities wearing it. It was held as a sacred textile. So at time of birth, death, and everything, Ajrak was being used. And I was searching for people wearing Ajrak, except for Ismail Bhai's family. I could see it in wonderful boutiques in Delhi and in Bombay, but not in the villages. So I'm just saying there's a very interesting thing. And subsequently, I just called an Ajrak master craftsman here to teach what he had learned through the designers. And you should have seen the emotional connection of this bhaipan that happened between them. So I think there's some very precious, beautiful, cherished cultural ties and binds that we have that has to be beyond the policies.
And I think you've touched on two very emotive things. One is our cultural connects and our deep-rooted ties. And also this worry, because exactly what you have felt about not seeing Ajrak worn by the Maldharis, the pastoralists, and others for whom it was meant, whose cloth it was, worries me greatly, because I see this across traditions.
Yes.
Because at the end, it becomes another fashionable wear. We are not connected to Ajrak because we can have an Ajrak today and we can have a Banarasi tomorrow. And while I know this is a topic for another discussion, I just wanted to underline what you'd said. But now I come back again to you, Annapurna, because as a theorist, as someone who has worked globally, what is your take on this?
I don't have a ready-made answer. I understand both the concerns you expressed and Noorjehan has expressed. I come from a small village in East Godavari district, which had 40 weavers in the back of my grandparents' house weaving saris that everybody wears. I still get from my aunts a sari from them. And I wear saris from all over India, and I don't wear saris sometimes. And sari means something to me entirely different than any other clothing. I'm very honest about that. I have a deep emotional bond to this textile and to this clothing and to the people who make it. On the other hand, I believe, and having spent lots of times with people like Kalam Bhai and many other craftspeople are so intelligent and so quick to adapt and change. And I tend to focus on that aspect. Also because things really always have changed. What we need to understand is how do we construct a world in which people who make and hold all these histories and skills have the most control over how the future. So it's not some big corporation telling them, oh, you make rangris for 10,000 rupees, now make it for 6,000 rupees, now make it for bandhani for 5,000, now make it for 1,500, which is actually what's happening in India in many, many places. These things make me very tense. And also and now you've asked that question, I'll say one more thing. So I really feel like, why do we need so much stuff?
Yeah.
Why can't we just have less stuff? And if we have less stuff, maybe the person who's making this really fantastic ajrak can make it in such a way. How do you introduce meaning to objects for people who don't have meaning associated with them because of their birth or their culture, whatever, their family or their community? One way is to educate, one way is to create that price point. One way is to make it something else in have conversations about it. All these things are possible. Since these are coming from the borderline of thinking and actually interacting with craftspeople. This is what I think.
There has been so much said that I appeal to the Asia Society to call us all together for 3 days so we can talk nonstop. But there are some things I'm going to just highlight very quickly. One is about IPR. Yes, we need sui generis laws in this country and across South Asia for traditional cultural knowledge and for traditional cultural products. That is really hugely important because we are not only losing things when we lose craftspeople, we are also losing when things are copied and faked and sold at half the price, something Annapurna and others have talked about. The other point is that I have been recently, actually during COVID, because it flattened the world, working in Argentina, doing a bit of work in Denmark, in Japan, and in other parts of the world. In fact, I had the honor of having Noorjehan also participate in the project that I worked on in Argentina. And what has resounded for me through this entire conversation is that, oddly enough, across the globe, we are speaking the same language. And I saw this in Denmark. One would think, oh my God, with their GDP, with their per capita income, the craftspeople there will be talking differently. But however different our cultural contexts are, the language remains the same, the demands remain the same. So therein lies my last question, because I'm getting warnings that we have very little time left and there's a series of questions coming from the audience. if you had the power, and you all do have the power, what would you do differently? What would you change? So I'm going to start now with Noorjehan.
I really feel that the dialogue has to begin across, within the country, within the region, and sort of across the region. So within the country, from the north to the south, as it is in India, we've got so many varied this thing. Not just dialogue, but we should be working, and projects have to start off. And like you just mentioned, there is just so much with it. It should not be left at mere theories. We have to put it in practice because we're running short of time. Yes, it's critical now. It's really critical with floods. So many villages have been completely flooded and underwater. It's awful what's happening. So we just need to, I think, put our resources together and try and break the boundaries and make it happen.
Thank you. Kalam, what will you change in the future? What do you want to make a difference with? Mute. Kalam, you're on mute.
Yes. So again, I can say we can make workshop more and more, and again want to develop the craft sector, and some NGOs treating the crafts person, and exploitation is much playing with us. Bargaining is a burning problem for us. So we have to change like this. I heard that there is a rule in Australia. The Aboriginal art cannot practice other people. I have seen so many people practicing, except the traditional people. I don't know whether it is good or bad, or what kind of impact for the crafts persons. So we have to think like this. If all of the artist people, so many communities started copying or practicing Kalighat people, then what about the Patuas? And the same thing I can say, the Madhubani paintings are only and like this. Nowadays so many people copying my work and selling, and so many person when they ask for the price, and they bargaining more and more. So it is very difficult. So this should be changed. So I recommended there must be a rule, or when a artist dies, the price of his artwork is higher and higher. There must be some certain amount goes to the family of this artist. So I can think like this.
Thank you, Kalam. Very critical points. Thank you. Now, Annapurna, you have the last word. And you're muted.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. Thank you. Thank you, Kalam Bhai and Noorjehan. I think that the main thing I would advocate is to create more critical thinking spaces among craftspeople, among NGOs, among people who work and write about the craft sector, not just in the English language, but in the diversity of languages that this entire region has. Because unless people who are like me are not asked to participate in a non-English language conversation, it's very hard to engage with the deep, complex, and rich, not complex in a bad way, but in a really rich way, of how these worlds are lived and these things are made and what those things come to mean. That's what I would do. Critical thinking, more publications, more funded research, for both craftspeople as well as research, not making products, research, spaces to experiment, spaces to research for craftspeople and people who think about craft.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, you all are not off the hook yet. There is such a long list of questions. So I start with a question from Shakil Abro from Pakistan. He asks, artists' work is normally promoted with their names, but the craftsperson's work are promoted anonymously. Why is this so? Why do most entrepreneurs not mention craftspersons' names and acknowledge who makes them while working with them? So, Kalam, आप बताइए क्यों नहीं नाम?
गुड क्वेश्चन. ये नाम इसलिए नहीं होता कि वो लोग जो लोग प्रैक्टिस करते हैं क्राफ्ट्स, वो दे आर फीलिंग लिटिल बिट वो पिछला वर्ग का लोग है, तो शायद उनके लिए सिग्नेचर वगैरह कुछ करना भी इतना ठीक नहीं होगा, क्योंकि इतना वैल्यू उनको देता नहीं है. तो इसलिए अब तो शुरू हो गया सिग्नेचर वगैरह करना, थोड़ा चेंज हो रहा है. तो ये बहुत जरूरी है, जो उसका भी नाम से ही होना चाहिए. जे दिस इज द कलम पेंटिंग्स और दिस इज द पेंटिंग्स ऑफ गुरुपद चित्रकार, this is a painting of the Boa Devi. So it should be do like this. It's a very, very good question. ये होना चाहिए. अच्छा क्वेश्चन है, क्योंकि ये भी inferior feel करते हैं, जो they are also suffering by inferiority complex because we are not, we don't have the institutional qualifications in this subject. This may be the only one reason.
Thank you. Annapurna, you have a question.
Actually, I want to contribute to that point.
Yes.
Because it's such an important question that was asked. So what Kalam Bhai is saying is very important, but I want to also put forward another view. I have worked with an artist who refused to sign his work and did not even want to claim authorship for the work, but he gave it to his father, who was not involved in making it, who was also practicing the same art form. So in this sense, they were not from a hereditary family of craftspeople. The father learned it from somebody who was hereditary, but he came from a different background. The son learned it from the father. By giving the father the authorship and refusing to claim it, he was actually reinstituting hereditary kinship-based craft. So it's so complex. And what do you do? Why should we commit this kind of violence for a person who feels that Bhagwan ne, the Devi, some of the artists said, Devi ne mere dwara ye kaam kiya hai. And this is not just a craft. Jayadeva said this when he talks about the Gita Govinda. So we have to come to terms with the incredible complexity and richness of how people imagine their work and their creativity when we think about things like signature.
Thank you for that. And Annapurna, you have another question. This is from an anonymous person. Can Annapurna elaborate on the disjunction between theory and practice that she mentioned?
Okay, so if we think about the way art education is taught, and this is pretty much all over. I studied both in a small state, in a state university and at Columbia, and I've been teaching in various kinds of colleges, that once you enter into the realm of ideas, it's called theory officially in departments. And if you're doing studio classes, you're doing practice. In the hierarchy of making, the highest is making ideas. The middle ground is somebody who is working in an Anglophone world, making gallery-based art. And then below that is the craftsperson who's making things which are traditional or supplying their craft to somebody who's making gallery-based art. So this hierarchy constructs, it's not just practice versus theory, but it's the hierarchies of practices and theorization of those practices. So this is, and then of course, when somebody is claiming authorship, they say, this is my concept. The other people just executed it. So I don't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to we can talk more. My email is available to everybody. If you want to talk more, just write.
We have a question for Noorjehan now. What are some of the more unusual or lesser known overlaps in craft traditions or materials cross-border between India and Pakistan?
It's a tough question. I think that study has not really been done in seeing, but yes, for example, I think blue and white ceramic tiles that we have in Multan and Uch is probably not happening in India. I may be wrong, but maybe you can guide. I think that craft has not been, for whatever reason, did not go wherever the line was drawn. So it doesn't fall in that part. And some of the, I think, stitches, embroidery, and we go into detail. There are quite a few. And interesting enough that two young boys from NID were doing the research on this weaving called case. And they had the grandparents' case that they found. And they were absolutely fascinated, went around India trying to find who is weaving case. But it turned out there's no more case weavers there. Of that kind of, they were doing something which was looking like a simple checkered blanket. And Arjun and Rashi, they connected through Ashok Chatterjee, connected with us, and we connected them with the craftspeople. So, Ritu, what you were saying earlier, it's wonderful how they were re-looking at case and something that is happening here, but it was there, it's no longer there. And there could be so many more like this. So it's difficult to answer accurately what the status is.
You're absolutely right about the case, because we have been writing about endangered textile crafts of India. And there is just one weaver left in Panipat called Khemraj Sundaryal. And just till 50 years ago, there were several hundred. But the power loom has taken over.
Yes.
And that so that is another hugely fraught area that I'm glad hasn't come up, because it would have taken over the discussion. But in Panipat, you will not see a hand loom. I mean, you will rarely see a hand from such a rich hand loom.
Exciting, the designers from India, but having that emotive again connection with it, and holding on to this fabulous indigo and white case. I don't know if he's online or not, but they've actually worked out, it was produced here for him, his design based on the old, and we sent it with great difficulty back to them. Actually, two of them are working on it. Sorry, I'm just going to add one very important point. I think we've all missed it, is the discerning eye to bring up the level, because the craft tendency is to go down. So if it's accepted, whatever is there, that awareness and to bring back that discerning eye is something that has to be also important, because patronage offered that where the excellence of craft was earlier.
We have seen that across traditions. And of course, everyone knows of the Himru. And all over Aurangabad, it says, "Welcome to the city of Himru." And there are two families left actually weaving the Himru. But there is one thing I want to add, which could, on inventory of intangible cultural heritage under which crafts falls, that because both India, Pakistan, and the rest of South Asia are signatories to the 2003 convention, one of the mandatory aspects is an inventory of the 5 domains of intangible cultural heritage. So it should be there somewhere. We have it in India. It's in the repository of the Sangeet Natak Academy. And I will research where it is in Pakistan, and perhaps we can add it on as one of the links. But I now have a question for Kalam. Kalam, there's no name. An anonymous person has asked this question, saying, "It is heartbreaking to see craftspeople being underconfident. Like you said, that they are lacking the confidence. What can we do to help generate pride and confidence? Up to you.
So actually, the craftsperson products and cannot sell in a good price. So it is very essential to his livelihood to make money. So they are all time they are suffering from poverty like this. तो इसलिए वो थोड़ा होता है, कॉन्फिडेंस लेवल जो है बहुत कम होता है. तो ये मार्केट भी उसका होना चाहिए अच्छी तरह. मैं भी बताया कुछ पहले जो एक्सप्लॉयटेशन बहुत ज्यादा होता है, तो इसको प्रिवेंशन करना भी बहुत जरूरी होता है. ये सब अगर उसका जो काम है वो डिस्प्ले होगा, अच्छी जगह से वर्कशॉप होगा, तो उसमें मन में आनंद होता है, कॉन्फिडेंस इसमें वो लेवल बढ़ सकता है. अदरवाइज इट इज वेरी डिफिकल्ट. मैंने कहा some NGOs collecting huge money from Indian fund abroad, and they are organizing events for development of crafts people. Actually ये दिखाने के लिए होता है. ज्यादातर पैसा वो लोग ही खा जाते हैं, क्राफ्ट्स पीपल को नहीं मिलता है. तो काम उसका अंडर में तो करता ही है, पर उसका मन में ये चीज है, वो भी बात भी कर सकता है जी पैसा ठीक नहीं मिलता है. तो ये सब चीज में उसका कॉन्फिडेंस लेवल कम आता है. और जो अच्छा काम करता है, जिसका अच्छा कर सकते हैं, मन में आनंद होता है, पैसा हो और ना हो, वो कॉन्फिडेंस तो अलग चीज होता है जो क्रिएटर होता है.
बिल्कुल सही बोला. अब नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन भी आप is open to the panel, but I want your answer first. How do craftspeople and artists, this is a question from Siko Berte, how do communities and artists view the issue of ownership and intellectual property right? आपने अभी बोला about others who are not hereditary outside the community doing the same art. What is your thought about this, Kalam?
Actually, I have seen some other communities people, कुछ empowered people होता है, जिसको मैंने देखा जो इतना साल खुद का ट्रेडिशन प्रैक्टिस कर रहा है, और उसके देख के कोई और अदर कम्युनिटी प्रैक्टिस करता है, उसका थोड़ा जान पहचान बहुत ज्यादा है, थोड़ा स्ट्रांग है, तो उसका इजीली अवार्ड भी मिल जाता है. हाँ, तो एक चीज होता है अवार्ड. हमारा देश में क्या होता है, अब सभी को थोड़ा बहुत मालूम होता है. जो इसका मैं जानता हूँ कोर्स जो काथा स्टिच मैंने पूछा, जो अब तो काम नहीं करता है, तो आपको कैसे अवार्ड मिल गया? बोले पता नहीं, मेरे को तो मिल गया है. तो इट्स हैपनिंग. तो वही है, तो ये देखना है, ये भी सोचने का बात है.
बिल्कुल.
कैसे सब कुछ.
Now this question is from Arzu Mistry and it's open to Noorjehan and to Annapurna. Participatory art practices in contemporary art also raises the same question of authorship. How does authorship carry community knowledge?
I would ask Annapurna to answer. I really have no idea about this. I can't answer.
Okay. I'm not sure what you mean by how does authorship carry community knowledge. So let me answer it in the way that I'm understanding it, and then if you have clarifications, again, you can either write to me or raise the question again or something. So contemporary art practices often valorize craft. By involving craftspeople in their very special languages into the practice of contemporary art. When in that collaboration, there's a kind of piety about craft, and it's valorized as tradition, and there's so much piety around it. But as it leaves the studio and begins to enter other realms of the world, let's say the the gallery and whatnot, that piety around craft is delimited to the appearance of craft in the artwork, but not in the total condition in which that artwork was made and exists in the world. Let's be really frank about that, at least in the realm I'm most familiar with, which is India. And how are things made? Glenn Adamson and Julia Bryant Wilson have written this book about studio and making. And even elsewhere in the world, artists are very reluctant to reveal the processes by which their objects are made, the art object is made. It's really hard. It's a craft secret in the studio. People say craftspeople are secret about their formulas for certain dyes or for how you test the acidity of something or whatnot. But people who are in contemporary artists are also equally secretive about the making practices. So in the end, if you go to India Art Fair, for example, I've worked with Vasvo, ex-Vasvo, and R. Vijay, and he does the guerrilla tactic of writing in R. Vijay, his collaborator, the Rajasthani miniaturist R. Vijay. He does a guerrilla tactic of writing in Vijay's name onto the labels. He hires someone like me, commissions someone like me to write a book that opens up this practice to contemplate these ideas. So yes, community knowledge is also, just to be really clear, craftspeople are imagined as though they hold this knowledge for eons and eons. No, sometimes craftspeople might only hold that knowledge in their community for, let's say, 150, 200, maybe 300 years, because lots of historical change happens. So I don't want to get too pious about these things. So I've answered it perhaps in an unsatisfactory way, but I'm against piety.
Thank you. And I think that given the numbers, given the diversity, which is what every conversation starts with, there is no one rule. And while we have to have some foundational ethics and thoughts, but the beauty of this sector is also the hundreds of shades of gray. And I actually come back now to the very question of craft. It is such a portmanteau word. I mean, how can one word cover a pot being made in a village and an incredible ajrak with its 21 steps, or a bronze casting made with the knowledge of Shilpa Shastra? I mean, this conversation really needs to be slowly unpacked, the threads pulled out, because this is not even the tip. It is a drop in the ocean. But there are even more questions. And since we have another 5 to 7 minutes, I'm going to read them out and use it. So we have a question here which says that, give me a minute, from Anurag Rana, which says, why should larger, and I think this is again directed at you, Annapurna, you have pressed many buttons today. Why should larger design art institutes include crafts any more than they do? Isn't collaborating with craft schools like Somaya a better idea, as they are reaching out more effectively and doing micro-level work?
So Anurag, right? The gentleman who asked
Anurag Rana.
Mr. Rana, I totally agree with you. When I speak about institutions actually thinking about their relation, engaging with craft, I'm not talking about another billion field documentation projects. No, where you teach people how to go into some crafts community and learn how they make their things, and then somehow you adapt it in this way and that way, push it around, and then it becomes design somehow. And I'm being a little bit disrespectful here. I'm sorry about that, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is that actually we have to think about the histories of how we have engaged with the crafts. Sort of abstractly do it, but actually reckon with what the way that we've engaged for 75 years with craft actually has constructed the scenario that we have today. And that it's called accountability. I think I'm asking, and yes, Somaya Kala Vidya, Handloom School, Mithila Art Institute, there are so many places which are going to grow, the Barefoot School, all these places are going to grow and they're going to change because more and more and more craftspeople are saying we're going to be our own voices, we're going to speak for ourselves, we're going to be designers of our own craft forms. So that part is covered, but I actually think that since not just craftspeople care about craft, but so many other people care about craft, and also their economic livelihoods are dependent on that craft, we actually have to undergo a process of serious reckoning, not to just apportion blame, but to actually understand. That's boring. What's more interesting is to think about how did certain kinds of scenarios develop, what kind of action should we take, and also hierarchies will develop within crafts communities, guaranteed. The people that go to those kinds of schools and the people who don't go to those kinds of schools, the people who practice ajrak under a brand label and the people who don't practice ajrak under a brand label. All these hierarchies will also start developing because this is a world that's governed in part by the market. And we have to be ready ourselves. We can't bury our head in the sand. We have to ready ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you, Annapurna. Very well spoken. And I think you speak on behalf of all of us. Now, this is a question for Noorjehan. Is the investment required in the sector primarily monetary, or are there other ways? What would these be? Would love to hear.
Definitely goes beyond monetary, which is extremely important too. Like Annapurna just mentioned, economics is really behind it all. So many crafts have languished, finished, because they couldn't get the two ends meet. But we spoke about it earlier, Ritu. It's how we give them respect, how we get them as part of our society. It's them and us, that has to finish. And I just read amongst the question, Ashok Chatterjee's very interesting comment that he made wasn't a question that our language itself is a barrier. And so we have to break all those barriers. And like I started off, if we start calling it dastkari itself, there will be a change.
This has come across from across the world. Respect, recognition, equal sharing of credit, active listening, not just pretending to listen to what the voices are. I mean, why are we not listening to the voices from the field? So, Ashok Chatterjee, you're right. I've just received it. And I repeat what he says here. Perhaps we need to take a lesson from some of the most effective interventions in the craft sector that have dropped this word in favor of dastakar and kala. Exactly what you're saying, Noorjehan. If we want the integrated culture to return, we need to dispense with the language that creates these barriers and buckets. Kala has no boundaries other than lifting the quality of life through a sense of service. It is that understanding of service that has always distinguished the culture we want to sustain. Ashok Chatterjee, and I would like to add, as he is my great guru, I take the liberty as a moderator to say it, that he has lived his life on the basis of these last few lines, that service has distinguished his life, service to people, craftspeople, students, and to the wider world. Thank you, Ashok Chatterjee, for that.
I second that, Ritu, completely. And for me, it's a also, I mean, great honor that he's there. I feel very humbled.
So to come back again to, I think, perhaps a penultimate question, it's from Gitanjali Sachdev. Art and design students engage with craft traditions for varying reasons: to understand design history and heritage, to introduce innovations with technique and materials, to assist with new product development, or to develop craft-oriented businesses, for example. However, what about current craft students becoming craft practitioners? Do you feel that the development of contemporary craft practitioners among future generations of art and design students is critical as a curricular trajectory in leading art and design educational institutions? The question is open to anyone on the panel who wishes to take it.
I think it will only happen, Ritu, when that, what we just spoke about, that respect, and you notch up their, they come at par with the fine artists and the designers, then only would they start adopting and becoming what we're calling the craftspeople.
Working with their hands. We have to go back to working with our hands. Annapurna, would you like to add something?
I'm just going to say very fast, if somebody is genuinely pursuing a craft, genuinely, I mean with sincerity, making things, why should anything limit them, and why can't they learn how to make things in new ways in institutions of different sorts? Why not?
Thank you. Kalam, this question is for you. What investment would you like besides the monetary? Would you also add a different type of education for traditional craftspeople and artists? What are your wider thoughts on this? Besides, programs and schemes, would there be mute, Kalam?
हाँ, ये भी हो सकता है. मैंने एक अपॉर्चुनिटी हो सकता है जो स्किल्ड क्राफ्ट्स पर्सन है वो कोई जो आर्ट इंस्टीट्यूट में सिखा सके उनका आर्ट एज ए टीचर, like the regular teacher or visiting professor like this. तो अब स्टूडेंट सीख सकता है. फिर वो जो आर्ट स्टूडेंट है तो एकदम कॉपी नहीं करेगा, वो तो आइडिया लेकर उसका अच्छा चीज बना सकता है इसके ऊपर. तो ये भी बहुत एसेंशियल है जो इंस्टीट्यूट में भी इसको सिखाना चाहिए. इट शुड बी अ सब्जेक्ट like many other subjects. So crafts, जितना crafts अभी तक है, crafts जो art है, तो ये भी art institutes में जा सकता है. वो craftsman जो है artist, जो skill person है, वो सिखा सकता है. ये बहुत अच्छा चीज है मेरे हिसाब से.
Thank you. One last question, and then I have to wrap up. This question is from Mudit Jain. Do you think promoting inclusive tourism with showcasing the artisans in their environment with their arts be a win-win for both artisans and tourists? Kalam, Noorjehan, Annapurna. Do you think it's a good idea to have tourism in areas where craftspeople reside? Will it be good for both?
It's good and bad, both. I mean, I don't feel, making them as performers, and there has to be much more of a sanctity of their own life. So, on the other hand, yes, I mean, I'm sure that it adds to the culture, and it's something interesting for a tourist to come and see what's happening. It's, I think, already being done in India quite a bit. But I don't know how much, except for some sales by the tourist does it really increase their sales a lot, or does it improve the work that they're doing? Does it make them be more participatory in what we said, the mainstream? So that is my question again too.
As always, 100 shades of grey. Annapurna, up to you.
I think tourism is one of those places where when certain situations or certain art forms reach a kind of juncture, it becomes a holding space for them to continue to have some sort of life before they sort of transform in another way or change in another way. Tourism is a useful holding space sometimes, but of course it's like anything else, it can be deeply exploitative. It can also provide young people a sense of their own, in rural areas especially, that their communities as modern as is participating in modernity when they have tourists come to their communities. And craftspeople also tour. It's not like craftspeople don't go on tours. They're also taking holidays and vacations and tirthyatras and whatnot. So it's not that, I can't say it's like the best thing in the whole world, nor can I say it's the worst thing in the whole world. As we've been saying again and again, it's really, really complex.
Well, thank you. You know, it was supposed to be a conversation starter for the series that is going to carry on. But because I have this incredible panel, we have moved, and I just have a few points written: IPR, sui generis laws, education, respect, authorship, the term dastakari, expression, innovation, tradition moving away from the original user and the patron community, to how it needs to come into higher education, how we need to change everything. So there is a lot to think about. But I'm afraid we have to now move on. And I know that the many strands that have emerged as a result of the panelists' unique position in the sector will continue to offer modes of inquiry into understanding these very foundational issues that we have barely been able to touch on. These are things we could debate, discuss for some time. Each one actually needs a day, several days of their own, because it is a truly complex and dynamic space that we work in. And as we said, it covers something available in your backyard, something as simple as mud, to something as precious as gold and silver and bronze casting, and many steps and processes, ancillary professionals involved, not just the person who actually sits on the loom or moves the pot, but all those other professionals in the ecosystem. And I'm sure for the future discussions of the Asia Society on this new vocabulary for crafts that follows in this series, that they will continue to unpack our discussions today and locate crafts within its broader context, while further contextualizing and redefining it. And I think for all of us on this panel, really according it's a recognition of its potential as a cultural and creative industry whose time has come within South Asia and certainly globally. So I cannot thank you all enough. You all have been marvelous. And I hope we actually meet soon, not just on Zoom, and I can shake all your hands. And I hugely thank the audience for their really energizing questions and their interest in the conversation. And I thank Asia Society for initiating this series, and I wish them all the best for the ones that follow. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.